Good day, this is Lonnie McHugh and I'll be your instructor for Dispersing Management Topic 4.17, the Deputies 2665. This is the Daily Agent Accountability Summary. It is the agent's version of a 2657. Our enabling objectives are to audit a DD Form 2665 in accordance with the DoD FMR Volume 5. And our reference for this, of course, is the DoD FMR Volume 5. Our focus today on our discussion points are going to be surrounding the 2665. So we're going to talk about what that form is, and we're going to walk through how to use it. It is similar to the 2657 in ways, so should be a quick learning point. The 2665 is prepared by the agent each day that they're doing business. It is a complete picture of all of their accountability and everything that they're working on. The dispersing officer is required to audit this form. If you look in the instruction, the DoD FMR Volume 5, you'll see two sets of information on how often this should be balanced. So for ashore operations, for ashore dispersing offices, this will be balanced out daily. But on afloat vessels, this can be done weekly. You also have the right to do it daily if you're on a afloat vessel, or you can do it anytime you suspect an irregularity. All right, so now that we've talked about what the form is, let's go ahead and start working on the form. So as you can see on the screen I've shared with you, this is the Daily Agent Accountability Summary. Looks very similar to the 2657, but some of the lines are different. So we're going to start with the header, work our way down through the form. So here we're going to fill out today's date, April 29th. We're going to look at line 1, our accountability at the beginning. So just like the 2657, we are taking yesterday's accountability and we are carrying it forward. For this example, we're going to say that there was nothing that happened on previous days. So our accountability at the beginning of the day is $0. Line 2 is our advances. This is what the dispersing officer will be giving the deputy. And as you can see, this can be cash, pre-positioned checks, or foreign currency. That's the other block. Cash is pretty self-explanatory. Pre-positioned checks are checks that the dispersing officer would write to the deputy so they could cash it at a future time. This is valuable if the deputy is going to need cash in the future and the dispersing officer won't be there. And the reason this is important is because the deputy has thresholds on how much cash that they're allowed to hold. And this allows them to resupply their cash in the event that the dispersing officer is absent, say they're at training or TAD. So this way, dispersing operations can continue as long as they have pre-position checks in place. And other foreign currency, this is not a very commonly used line item. So we're not going to focus on that today because there's a whole bunch of forms and equations that you have to do to manage foreign currency. So for this example, we're going to say we received $5,000 in cash from the dispersing officer, and the deputy received $2,500 in pre-positioned checks. So we're going to start with the $5,000 in today column, and that will carry over to the cumulative column. And we are going to scroll down and enter that $5,000 in cash on hand on line 17. This is where we're going to check to make sure that we balance. So the 2665 is a little different than the 2657 for balancing. On the 2657, we're just going to make sure that everything balances. But on the 2665, there's 3 different sets of numbers that we need to look at to make sure that we balance. We're going to talk about the first 2 right now. right, so the first one is checking line 9, our gross accountability, and verifying that this matches 32 Charlie. As we can see, both have $5,000, so we match. Our next check is to determine if our line 15, accountability at the end of the period, matches our 32 echo, and it does, so we balance. So those are two checks that we're worrying about right now to make sure that we balance. All right, so we also received pre-position checks in this advance. So we're going to increase this to 7,500. This carries over to 7,500 here. Then we are going to scroll down to pre-position treasury checks, line 19. We're going to enter 2,500 here. So again, we're going to check, does line 9, gross accountability, match 32 Charlie? And it does. And then we're going to check line 15. Does this match our 32 echo? And it does, so we balance. All right, now we're going to move on to vouchered collections. And this is going to be our S2 and S3 collections. So for this example, we're going to say that we received $420 for our voucher collections from food service. So it's going to carry over to cumulative. And then this was a check in this example. So we're going to take this down to negotiable instruments and add 420. So we're going to check our balancing. Does line 9 match 32 Charlie? It does. Does 15 match 32 Echo? It does. So we balance. We can continue forward. Again, voucher collections, S2, S3. So food service is the 1359 and retail ops is the 1149. Right. Line 4 is our treasury check issues. What that really means is it's a legal vouchered payment. So expect to have an SF 1034 that goes with this. So we're going to have vouchered, and then there's the other. And if you remember, all of our payments are going to be vouchered. So the other column is used for exchange for cash checks. All right, so in this example, we're going to say that we paid a bill for $460. That carries over to here to our today column, and that carries over to our cumulative. So we paid out a voucher. So we go down to line 23, paid vouchers. We'll enter that 460 there. Now we're going to check, does line 9, 8,380, match our 32 Charlie? And it does. 15 matches our 32 Echo. So we are good for balancing. All right, so say we received an exchange for cash. So that means that we are issuing out a check for cash that we received. So we're going to say this is $250. So that equals 710 and 710. Right, this is where it's a little different. So this still falls under negotiable instruments if we were doing it exchange for cash check. But in this example, we receive cash for this. So we're going to increase our cash by $250. So now we're going to check, does our line 9 match 32 Charlie? It does. 15 matches 32 Echo, we balance. Line 5, transfers from other dispersing officers. This one can be a little bit confusing. This is not typically used. This line item is used if somebody is closing down a DSSN. So a dispersing station symbol number will no longer exist. They're closing down the operation and they're transferring accountability to another dispersing office. We will not be covering this, and this is extremely uncommon, and it is not even used by the Navy at this point in time. Line 6 is our exchange gain accumulations. And this is if we had foreign currency. Typically, foreign currency has a conversion rate that goes past 2 decimals. So if there was a gain or loss there, we would account for that on this line. Again, that's a whole other scenario where we have to fill out a 2663 and a 2664, and there's some equations in there, and we are not diving into that today. Our line 7, other, is for S2 and S3 unvoucher collections or cash overages. So for this, we're going to say that we received an unvouchered collection from retail ops in the amount of $460 cash. Let's make it $750. All right, so that will increase our cash on hand to $6,000. And we're going to do our check to see if line 9 matches 32 Charlie. Does. And does our line 15 match 32 Echo? It does. So we balance. Line 8 is a total, and line 9 is our line 1 plus our line 8. So if we had a dollar value here, these two would be different. Moving on to line 10, transfers to other dispersing officers. This is not used, and again, this would be if you are closing down your dispersing operation. Line 11 is exchange loss accumulation. So again, that's if we are calculating an exchange rate and it goes past 2 decimal places, this is where we would account for that loss in value. Our line 12 is cash shortage. So anytime that you are losing cash. Our line 13 is return to principal. And we're going to dive into this one a little bit more at the end. But this is when the deputy is returning accountable assets to the dispersing officer. We move. Line 16, limited depository is not used. DoD wide. US currency on hand. Pretty self-explanatory. Our foreign currency on hand. Again, we're not using this one. We're not going to dive down into the calculations for this. We've already covered prepositioned treasury checks, negotiable instruments, US, foreign negotiable instruments. We don't use block 22. '23 we covered. That is a paid voucher, so something that would be go along with SF 1034, a vouchered payment. Line 24, funds in transit, is not used by the Department of Defense anymore. And then line 25, funds with subagents. This would be if the deputy had funds with agents beneath them. This is not commonly used because typically those subagents or the agents would have received their money from the dispersing officer. Are deposit tickets, not LDA. So what this refers to is if somebody had made deposits, or sorry, somebody had brought in checks and we cashed them and we were depositing them. So this is not on a government account. So let's say that we went and cashed a check for Seaman Timmy and several of his friends in the amount of $500. So we're going to add this here, makes this 920. This will drop our cash down to 5,500. So we receive checks, and these are personal checks, not US Treasury checks. We cash them, so our cash went down. So now we're going to check if 9 matches 32 Charlie. It does. And if our 15 matches 32 Echo, and that matches as well. Right, so say we decided that we knew that we wanted to deposit these checks. So we're going to go ahead and deposit them. So now we don't balance. And so what we're going to do is it's going to be deposited checks, and we are going to deposit that with the dispersing officer. So as you can see, when you look at this, we don't balance. So 9,380 does not match 9,880. And so since we are depositing our checks, we're going to subtract that amount from our negotiable instruments. So that equals 420. And you'll see that line 9,380 matches our 32 Charlie. All right, so now we're going to look at our 15. Does this match our 32 Charlie or 32 Echo? And it does not. And the reason that these don't match is because our line 13 is another balance check. So here on line 13, we've said that we are returning to principal $500, and that's the cumulative amount. So when we do that, we have to add that dollar value here to return to principal. So our line 13 should balance our 32 delta. And that will make our 15 balance to our 32 Echo. So again, our three balancing numbers are 32 Charlie needs to match line 9. Our 32 Delta needs to match line 13. And our 32 Echo needs to balance to line 15. All right, moving on to line 27, dishonored checks receivable. So this one is not used by the deputy dispersing officer, and that is because dishonored checks are turned into the DSSN, and that means the dispersing officer there. So the dispersing officer will receive the dishonored checks receivable. They will annotate that on the 2657, and they will track that for collection. Line 28, check overdrafts receivable, would be used if that dispersing officer wanted to transfer that accountability to the deputy. This is not commonly used and is typically maintained on the 2657. Loss of funds is for any funds that you would have lost. Say when you were balancing, you notice $5 was missing. So we'll put $5 here. We'll reduce our cash to 4,495. And we'll notice that our line 9 matches our 32 Charlie, line 15 matches our 32 Echo, and line 13 still matches our 32 Delta. Deferred vouchers is no longer used by the DoD, and other is not currently used unless just prescribed to you by your field examination group. So this is probably where they would have you work out any unique scenarios. And that covers section 1 and section 2. So typically at the end of your period of accountability, you'll say, I want to turn in paperwork for the vouchers that I paid. We're going to turn that in, add that here. So again, after that, we're going to make sure that our line 9 matches our 32 Charlie, our 13 matches our 32 Delta, and our 15 matches our 32 Echo, and all of those balance. We wanted to reduce our cash. Maybe our authorized amount that we were allowed to have is $5,000, and we wanted to deposit $995 with the dispersing officer. We can do that. And then so we will add $960 and $995. Equals 1955. So we're going to check to make sure that our 9,380 matches our 32 Charlie, and it does. Our 13 matches our 32 Delta, it matches. And our line 15 matches our 32 Echo. So we balance again. All right. So that concludes section 1 and section 2. Section 3 is the location of all of our cash and pre-position checks. So if the deputy had subagents, you'd put that here, and that would be annotated. The agent will print in block 2, put their address and location, and sign block 4. Section 4 is a detail of all your transactions. So deposit tickets that you've done, and so that'll explain each one of those, and that will allow the dispersing officer to audit. Paid vouchers, so that will describe all the vouchers that were paid, and then you will have the logs and ledgers to back this up, and that will be used again by the dispersing officer to audit. Collection voucher and collection voucher logs will be annotated here, and again, that is what the dispersing officer will use to audit this form. Treasury checks on hand, vouchers returned for collection. So shouldn't have these, but that would be if there was some sort of error. So you paid a voucher, you filled out the SF-1034, and then it was submitted to DFAS. Maybe DFAS, whenever they processed it, they realized that you had made an error. And so they submitted that back to you for correction, and you would annotate that information here. And additional remarks that the agent would like to make to the dispersing officer. We'll close out this form. All right, so again, this form is very similar to the 2657, but it is a little bit different. And it needs to be processed every day, just like the 2657. For float units, it needs to be balanced out at least weekly. For shore units, that is balanced out daily. All right, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions. And that concludes our lesson.